Alright, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going over a series of video presentations for the Rankin Technical College Application and Web Development AWD1111.NET Framework with Web Database class. The textbook for the class is ASP.NET MVC with Entity Framework and CSS by Mr. Lee Naylor. I've shown you this before, but very quickly, and I want to make sure it's very quick. There are 18 chapters in this book. I have now done lectures on chapters 1 through 10. Make that 1 through 11. All right. And 14 through 18. So in other words, what's left are chapters 12 and 13. Chapter 12, which I'm going to do now, is a short chapter, as you can see, only about 15 pages long. I will do that chapter today and put off the deploying to Azure until my next lecture. So, I'm going to jump into or attempt to page 427, Introduction to ASP.NET Core v1.0, MVC6, and EF7. At the time of writing this book, Microsoft was working on the next version called Core 1.0, which is now available. This contains significant changes to .NET, with the biggest aim to make it more platform independent. Due to the size of these changes, the release is going to be named ASP.NET Core v1.0. Originally, as it says, it was to be known as ASP.NET v5 and ASP.NET MVC. So the MVC part would be called MVC v6. The entity framework was going to be called v7. However, as it says, everything is now under the single umbrella of ASP.NET Core v1.0. As we write this, the available version is here. One of the most significant changes is an update to the way HTML tags are generated in scaffolding views using a new feature known as tag helpers. All right. So what I like to always do when we do this is to come up here and type in ASP.NET tag helpers. Look in the Microsoft documentation. All right. So, nice place to start. What are tag helpers? Tag helpers enable server-side code to participate in the creation and rendering of HTML elements in Razor files. For example, the built-in image tag helper can append a version number to an image name. When the image changes, the version, or the server rather, generates a new unique version for the image. So clients are guaranteed to get the current image. Ideally, these tag helpers provide an HTML-friendly development experience. For the most part, using tag helpers looks like standard HTML. Front-end designers conversant with HTML, CSS, JavaScript can edit Razor without learning Razor syntax. Also, it provides IntelliSense. And it provides a way to make you more productive. Well, this is kind of the shtick that always gets put in here, kind of a marketing spin, allowing you to produce more robust, reliable, and maintainable code. Okay? All right. So the following is an example of working with MVC6, and I have done nothing with MVC6. And ASP.NET Core 1.0 to build a simple baby store website. It will show products and categories and use two database contexts, one for store data and one for authentication, as in what we've been doing earlier. Start by creating a new core project. So this is different. Okay, we did ASP.NET web application. Notice if I come in here, in here, and I do create a new instance of Visual Studio here. All right, so let's do this. Let's do a file. In fact, let's just exit so we're sure we're starting brand new. All right, so we'll start up Visual Studio. And if I do a file, new project, and I go into my C# web, all right, you'll notice there's web application, core web application with .NET Core, and core application with .NET Framework. All right, so our author has said that we want this .NET Core. So we would choose the middle one that's right there. Project templates for creating, yeah. And notice for use in Windows, Linux, and OS X using .NET Core. When that comes up in the next window, as is shown on page 429, choose a web application template type and leave the authentication to individual user accounts. You'll notice when you look in here, there is empty, there is web API and web app. There's nothing that says MVC per se. When you click the OK button, a new solution will be created. The solution contains a different structure than our MVC5 projects that we looked at before, and now contains two top-level folders. One named Solution Items, one named SRC for Source. Solution Items will contain a global.json file containing information about the solution in JSON format. All right. The Baby Store project, as it says, is located in the source folder and already contains several folders you will be familiar with. It says, note we did not specify we were creating an MVC project, yet an MVC project was created. This is due to the fact that Microsoft is aiming to move web development away from web forms and aims only to support MVC projects in .NET Core. This is the impetus or the main reason why in this class we moved away from using web forms and we moved into using MVC. All right. So next they have you add a new class named category in the models folder. This is all stuff we've done before. And update the content to add properties to represent the ID name. So you've done things like this before. This is one of those navigational properties. Why? Because we have to be able to have a linkage between category and products. Then we add a new product class in much the same way. Different fields, of course, but the same kind of an idea. As it says, these classes work the same as the other simple classes in the models folder that we used earlier during the MVC5 project and model a zero-to-many relationship between category and product. A category can have several products or a category can have 0 products. And a product can belong to none or to 1 category. That's it. This becomes more complex when you start to allow products to be in more than 1 category, if you decide you want to do that. It says we are going to follow the pattern we used for the MVC5 project and come in here and create a separate database context class for the data store rather than using the existing user database. This time we're going to add the file to the models folder rather than to create a data access layer or a DAL folder. Add a database context class called store context to the models folder. It says as follows. The class derives from DB context and contains properties representing each table in the database. All right. So the class contains a constructor method which takes an input parameter named options, which is passed to the constructor. Very much similar to what we've already seen. All right. Seeding the database with test data on the bottom of page 431. Data seeding is done differently in ASP.NET Core than in previous versions. To seed this, you need to add a new class named seed data to the models folder. There it is. Then on the next page here on 432, we see the seeding. So there's our products. All right. So you can see here we added 2 categories, feeding and sleeping, and here we added 2 products. So the seed data, as mentioned here on the middle of page 432, contains a method named initialize. We will later call this method when the application starts up in the startup.cs file. Okay? All right. For ASP.NET Core projects, configuration is no longer performed in web.config. Rather, it's done via JSON. And again, to my knowledge, one of the reasons it's being done this way, like this, is because it makes it much easier to go across platforms. Microsoft has been providing more and more support to their products on a Mac OS type of platform, a Linux platform, etc. So as it says, for ASP.NET Core projects, configuration is no longer performed in the web.config file. Rather, it's done via JSON in the appsettings.json file. To add a new connection, it says add the following bold entry to the appsettings.json file. So in other words, this stuff should be there already. So you're adding this. And it doesn't look very different from the kind of thing that we've done earlier in our web.config file. This will create the database under the user folder, okay, that you're logged into. Right. 433. Configuring the project to use seed data, or the seed data class in store context. We now need to configure the app to use the seed data class, the store context class, and the new connection string. It says edit startup.cs, and you're going to have to put this in. It's not that different, all right, from the way we've done things previously, but again, the main difference so far that we've seen in here is twofold. First, the way that we set up the seed data, and second, the fact that we're not in web.config, we're in this app.settings where we're using JSON. All right. Page 434. First, you must build the solution. You've seen that before. Migrations in ASP.NET MVC Core no longer run in the package manager console. Rather, they run in the command window. To create and populate the database, you follow the 4 steps shown on the top of page 434. First, you open the command prompt and you navigate to where the baby store core directory is. Second, you run the .NET EF, .NET Entity Framework migrations add initial -c store context command to add a migration called initial to the project. And they mention in there a couple things. First, a new file named with a timestamp on it, initial CS, will now have been created under the migration folder. All right, I guess it's one thing. As its name suggests, it contains a snapshot of the models backing the store context file, allowing the entity framework to differentiate against the current model. Create the database by running the .NET EF database update command. And to populate the database, start the project without debugging. The category and product tables should now be populated with data from the seed class. All right. Adding controllers and views. It says we're now going to add 2 controller classes, one for products and one for views, to get a simple site up and running with the new data. right-clicking on the controllers folder and doing Add Controller. Choose MVC Controllers with View Entity Framework option. You've seen this, you've done this before. Again, it should come in and it should create that and give us CRUD capabilities also. Click the Add button, and as it says here on page 436 at the top of the page, then in the Add Controller window, add a new controller named Categories Controller with a model class set to category, the data context class set to store context, and the options all checked here. Click the Add button right here, and that should create the new Categories Controller. Similar to those found in MVC5, but they say, however, all the methods that query the database are asynchronous by default in ASP.NET Core. One point to note they mentioned there is that the class no longer creates an instance to store context in the controller itself. Rather, it's passed to the constructor as is shown here on page 436. ASP.NET Core is geared towards supporting dependency injection to avoid hard-coding dependencies in the code. This is an example of where the generated code no longer hard-codes an instance of the object it requires. Rather, it passes into the class. It is passed into the class. So the line of code that you see there on the bottom of page 436, that code, as mentioned, was added to the startup.cs file to ensure that whenever the project requires an instance of store context, it will use the store context class. Repeat this process and add the products controller, so you'll pretty much do it the same way. To view the data in the site, it says first, add some hyperlinks to the controller. All right, so you can see your categories and you can see your products. Note they mention here, rather than using the action link helper, the links in the products use the new anchor control helper. All right? But what you see on the next page is it looks pretty similar to what we've seen before. When the website is running, open the products index page and click on the create new link. You'll receive an error null reference exception, object reference not set to an instance of an object. This bug is caused by issues with the scaffolded code in the create and edit methods in the product controller class. You have to update both to change the data generated in each method so that a select list generates the text element for each item in the list. There's the change there and here. Make the changes to the select list code in the two versions of the edit method since they suffer from the same problem. Now, this was not even a brief introduction. I probably have mentioned this before, but just on the very off chance, I have not. The Microsoft site for ASP.NET is, here's a surprise, ASP.NET. And if you go out there, it brings you to right here. Now you'll notice they have free courses, they have free videos, etc. If I go to the videos, now there's an ASP.NET Core Quick Start. Free course with Steve Smith. I would strongly recommend it if you want to get something, because I didn't give you very much out of this. All right? But that you go watch a free chapter. All right? But it gets started for free. I would recommend that you go out there. So it's ASP.NET Core QuickStart.com. But I believe if you just put in this, and you come in here, that will get you to it as well, and it does. All right, that's it for this chapter. So all that's left now after this is to go over Chapter 13, see if we can possibly do anything to deploy this to Azure. So I'm going to download the Chapter 10 code as a starting point. All right, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to come back. Today is Friday. I'm going to come back on Monday. It's not a particularly long chapter. About 25 to 30 pages, but there's a lot of pictures that go through these. So I'm going to go through and try to do everything, all right, that they talk about in this chapter on Monday. See you then.